back on the 0 Hour. I am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Joining us once again is our good friend, Professor Richard Wolff. You know him if you are in any way a regular listener or viewer of this program. Richard Wolff is an economist and a historian. He is Professor Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. He is also a visiting professor at the New York University in New York City, and he is the host of Economic Update on Free Speech TV Tuesday evenings. His latest book is This Sickness is the System. So Richard Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, RJ. Glad to be here.
It's always good to have you. And I know I throw these broad questions at you, but with so much of a military nature going on in the news, with our deep role in arming Israel in the conflict in Gaza, in our role in arming the Saudis in Yemen, basically in our role as a military arms supplier and dealer to the world, it got me to thinking about the relationship between capitalism and what I might call chronic militarism. It seems to me that to the extent that the global capitalist system is in any way sort of developed systems of self-regulation or self-maintenance over the centuries, where does this fit in exactly? Is it about military sales that are driving all this? Is it economic domination? Is it competition for trade? I imagine the answer is some or all of the above. But do you have any sense of, or can you put into words for us, the kind of tectonic forces that, if you agree to begin with, that we are in effect, kind of arms supplier to the world and sort of arbiter of military expansion of various kinds. Can you give us a sense of how that might have come to be? It's not the only system we could be living under, after all.
No, I think there are, like with any major part of human history, when you look at the causes of that part, you have to, if you're honest, come away with a long list. There are many things that have to happen for military conflict to be seen by people as a potential solution. I would argue that in many, many cases, one of the interesting questions is why the turn towards military solutions when they have so often proved so ineffective in solving our problems. One really has to begin to wonder why you keep doing something which doesn't get you what you thought it would get you in all your previous turnings to that solution. And here in the United States today, it seems to me a glaring example of that. If you're honest, then the last three wars that the United States has given itself to directly, and I mean by that Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, the United States either has lost or is about to lose all of them. In other words, if there were geopolitical objectives, if that was part of the story to prevent Vietnam, or at least South Vietnam, from becoming a country governed by a communist party, well, then all the American dollars spent, all the American lives lost, all the wounded and dead Vietnamese. And what have we got to show for it? A unified country run by the Vietnamese Communist Party. That didn't work out real well. Mr. Biden has announced that all remaining U.S. troops in Afghanistan will be leaving by September of this year, which is really a very few months from now, and that there will be no conditions. Every European newspaper I read indicates that the Taliban, our ostensible enemy in going there nearly 20 years ago, is stronger today as a political and military force in that country than it was when this war began. That would also qualify for a defeat. And if you follow the internal politics of Iraq, one of the few things the different factions inside Iraq agree upon is they want the United States out. Why would you continue to see, to imagine, to spend money to support military solutions given a record as dismal as that? And then, of course, there's the scary answer that the geopolitical was less the reason than it was the excuse, and that the real reason for militarization of conflict is more domestic than it is foreign, that it has to do with the fact that the federal government in this country spends somewhere between $700 and $800 billion, that's the official number, every year on military equipment. That is a staggering amount of money. It means that literally hundreds and thousands of corporations, ranging from the biggest in the country on through the middle and into the small businesses, basically depend on quote unquote defense expenditure. And they are going to spare no expense in using a part of the profits they get from selling military equipment to influencing our politics in every way that they can to keep these customers coming back for more rockets and more missiles and more planes and all the rest of it. I know it's comforting for people on the conservative right to think that the welfare outlays of the government have to do with the fact that so many people depend on welfare that they become a voting bloc that can keep it going. Well, if you use that argument, it would apply even more powerfully to the defense enterprises, because there are a much smaller number of people who can and do get together much more regularly and can focus huge amounts of money in addition to whatever votes they control. And so the same logic would have to apply. So for me, I lean more in that second direction, because the geopolitical gains are so few and the losses so huge that you really could not rationally account for turning to militarism on the grounds of what it achieves abroad. So you're left with what it satisfies, and that's profits at home. So yeah, I think there's a relationship between capitalism and its relentless drive for profits on the one hand, and the amount of money and time and energy spent to keep the profits flowing by making sure that the military equipment is used, whether or not it achieves ostensible geopolitical purposes abroad. And one more thing, your question does lead me to remember to mention. There is, if you like, a psychological dimension. Right. Capitalism works through what capitalists themselves celebrate as competition. And competition is understood as something that separates the winner from the loser in the economic sphere. Two or more companies are competing to produce the best product at the lowest price. This is a ruthless competition, because whichever one of them produces the best quality at the lowest price wins all the customers. And here comes the psychology, destroys the others. The others disappear. They go bankrupt. They vanish from the economic scene. Their equipment is sold on the secondary equipment market and is purchased by the winners. The workers who lose their job in the companies that lose the competition go and look for jobs working for the company that won the competition. So that competition is so ruthless that the winners literally eat or absorb the losers. This kind of mentality that associates winners and losers in this kind of ruthless live and die relationship might be a little more ready to imagine that what one country does to another is some sort of parallel to what a competing company does to another. And that's a terrible analytical mistake, even if it is psychologically plausible. But I fear that this kind of logic is in fact at work. And for me, the biggest example is the United States and China now. I mean, these are the two dominant economic players in the world. They're not the only ones, but they're the two dominant ones. And they seem determined, and here I would have to put the blame on the United States. They seem determined to move in the direction of more and more acerbic conflict that ends historically with war, when it would be obvious, I think, to any rational person, both Chinese and American and anyone else, that working out your differences, working out how you can coexist in a large world economy is a much less dangerous way to move forward than to do what Mr. Trump, for example, did, and what Mr. Biden looks like he's going to continue to do, which is a trade war and tariffs and sanctioning companies and so forth and so on. And again, the United States has been the aggressor here, not just under Mr. Trump, but apparently now it's going to continue. And I find that, given our history and everything else, a very scary prospect.
And I wonder if there's one other dimension to this. And I realize we're in, a very intangible dimension of the conversation right now. But one of the things that certainly has been enhanced by our conversations in terms of my own understanding, for example, about the workplace, is your insights about the workplace. Most workplaces under our economic system are not very democratic places. They're very hierarchical places. They are not democratic. They are not collaborative. They are top down. And if you've ever had a senior role in a corporation, which I think, fortunately for you, you haven't, but maybe you have, but I have, then that's a constant competition among senior executives to see who's going to come out on top. So the very psychology that says it's conflict, somebody's got to come out on top, and it's going to be hierarchical from there down. I wonder if that kind of mentality doesn't have something to do with it too.
No, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. This notion that the world is populated by winners and losers rather than by people who have figured out ingenious ways to cooperate, that is a terrible defect of modern culture and society. And since modern culture and society is the superstructure, if I may borrow a term, from the economic foundation we call capitalism, well, then capitalism may not be the sole cause. I'm sure it isn't, but it is certainly a factor that moves in the direction of imagining yourself. And that's what we're talking about in this endless struggle. And you imagine that because in your workplace, if you're a corporate executive, and let's remember that the overwhelming majority of the people at the top of our political system come from and will indeed return soon to the same corporate mentality, the same corporate institutions that we're talking about here, that absolutely that plays its role in this kind of thinking. It's very ironic that we suffer, and I'm talking here as an American, we suffer from the mentalities inculcated in us by the workplace until the point is reached when we have to go find a therapist. And one of the things a good therapist tells us is that we need to work out, to be explicitly able with the people we're closest to work out an understanding of one another, a way to live together that is mutually satisfying and worthwhile, rather than to see ourselves in an endless, embattled conflict situation. It's so ironic that this is the advice given by people who are trying to help us cope with a mentality shaped by the very system we're talking about.
And, it always strikes me that when you ask someone in that world, well, how did your presentation go? I crushed it.
Yes.
I crushed it. Right?
Or I killed it. I killed it.
Right. It's never, well, we worked out something great. I crushed it. It's also strikes me, Richard Wolff, that I read somewhere, I don't know if it's true, but I believe it, that the defense so-called industry, the military industry, has employs people in all 435 congressional districts of the United States. And it certainly seems to me that our political system is such that voters are in a constant state of precarity in terms of their employment, right? So they're going to react, perhaps, some of them will, against someone who threatens those jobs by voting against constant military expansion, and not to mention the campaign contributions and so on that go into the system too. So it goes into our political economy, doesn't it? It goes into the way we govern ourselves and how interlocked that is with wealth as well as survival.
Well, and let's be real honest with one another. If you study the military-industrial complex, you will see that they understand and they discuss openly exactly what you said. The military have millions of people directly dependent upon them, soldiers, civilians, working in all the branches of the military. And then they have all the companies that need the military to buy what they produce. And the military have told the companies, and the companies have told the military, if we cooperate, there's the irony for you, we can be secure in what we depend on. So it is not an accident that every congressional district has long ago learned that you will continue to get the contracts you hope for from the military if the folks in the military see you working actively in your congressional district to support the military with the budgets that they need or say that they need, etc. This is an old example of the irony that in a capitalist system, the ruthless competition outside the enterprise, one with the other, often requires for you to win something very different inside the enterprise. Yes, you're right. The corporate executives at the top are competing, but they are also working very hard to coordinate all the different divisions of the enterprise to make them cooperate in the best possible outcome to better compete with other enterprise. The contradictions between the cooperation and the competition is a feature of our culture. It's not all one way. It is more a tension between these two. That's why we find it still comforting to explain to our children when they are young the importance when they're in the sandbox with another toddler. And the question is, who gets to play with the little truck? We teach our children, share. It's good to share. This is an adult who long ago forgot what the word meant, except it comes to mind when you're trying to get the children not to hit each other over the head with the truck, but to rather learn, well, you could play with it for a while I fill up the little pail, and then I'll get the truck and you can work, the contradiction is what drives people crazy here because of the absurdity of it all. It's like the so-called debate in my profession between planning and market. And then I have to always raise my hand and once again explain that the same corporate executive who on the 4th of July gives you a speech about the beauty and the efficiency of the market never allows the market inside their enterprise. Indeed, they became a big company precisely for buying the companies they did not want to have a market relationship with anymore because it was too inefficient, too insecure, too volatile. And so you solve the problem by bringing the other company, a buyer of yours, a vendor to you, into your own business, because now you don't have to have the ugly, inefficient, wasteful, chaotic market that you celebrated on the 4th of July. And this contradiction is so powerful that the people who live in this system are desperately in need of pretending that it isn't there.
Again, we're talking with economist Richard Wolff, and one of the things that occurred to me while you were talking was that on the rare occasions when a CEO, for example, actually believes that stuff, it can be disastrous. I'm thinking in particular of Sears Roebuck. And this guy, I'm blanking on his name.
Yes, I remember.
He decided
who swooped in toward the end.
Right. Competition is so great. My different departments are going to compete with one another. I remember my wife and I went there and we tried to buy a refrigerator. I hadn't heard about this yet. And they were like, well, no, I'm not going to show you that refrigerator. I'll show you this. It was insane. And of course, they went under. I mean, he just couldn't, they couldn't survive practicing this sort of internal free market. And yet, if the theory was correct, one would think Sears would now be the largest, most successful business in the United States. And yet somehow it is not. So I guess, let me know. Okay, I think we've done that one. Let's do this one, which is we celebrate in this country that we have free speech, freedom of information, freedom of the press. But going back to this issue of militarization, it seems to me that unless I tune into like alternative media or something, everywhere I go, I pretty much hear the same story when it comes to foreign policy and the military, including on MSNBC or whatever. I've got retired generals who are now on the board of Raytheon or what have you, telling me why we need to ramp up our military spending beyond the, preposterously high levels it is now, and so on, even though the Cold War is supposedly over, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You'd think if market competition was so great, and if there are so many people in this country who know that that's nonsense, why hasn't a TV station come along that caters to people like me who don't want to hear that stuff from retired generals who work for Raytheon? Where's the breakdown there?
Well, I think you're seeing something that I could describe in parallel stories. The polling in this country, Gallup and the other major polling institutions, show us over and over again massive majorities of Americans in favor of all kinds of things that both the mass media and our political system simply ignore. I mean, poll after poll indicates that Americans want less economic inequality than we have. It is so extreme that they don't even understand, because the pollsters cleverly ask, how much inequality do we have? They then specify less inequality as existing than what is in fact the case. But they want even less than what they admit or think is the case. And they're completely shocked when you explain to them, no, it's actually much worse than you think it is. And then they reassert, and we're talking 70, 80, 85% of polled, randomly selected poll people telling us this. And the Congress of the United States, other than lip service, does basically nothing about it, because it's been true for decades. And I think the same applies to the military, that you have done a very good job. I take my hat off to the military producers, corporate, and the military establishment. They've done their job. They have persuaded those who need persuading. They have, I'll be polite now, donated to those who need, above and beyond persuasion, a little financial lubrication. They've done all that. And so everybody intones the accepted, repeated wisdom, no matter how phony or false it is. You know, I'm a professor. I give talks. In my talks, I learned years ago when, after the United States was driven out of Vietnam in 1975, I would occasionally be asked a question or asked to give a talk about the economics of that war and how we didn't pay for it with taxes, but paid for it with borrowing. And I would explain, because the war was so unpopular, that if you had let the American people know that not only was your child in danger of being dead over there or wounded for life over there, but we're also going to tax you $5,000 a year to pay for this craziness, then the absence of support would have become close to 100%. They knew all of that. They understood all of that, and they understood you have to take the steps necessary, so that when I would give a talk and I would say, well, then in 1975, and I would sometimes show a clip of the American personnel hanging on to the bottom of the final helicopters. If you may remember the images, the helicopters leaving Saigon with people hanging on for life to get out of there. And I would refer to the defeat of the United States in that part of the world. I could look across my audience to my young American students, 18, 19, 20, 21 years of age. They looked at me in stunned disbelief, because they grow up in what I would call a comic book culture, a culture which has told them over and over again that the United States is an exceptional place. And one of the things that's exceptional about us is we have lots of wars and we win them all. And this childish junk is the wisdom that very few people dare to question. And even if they do, they dare to articulate their question, because it'll only get you into all kinds of deep trouble.
Well, since we've been dealing with so many unfairly broad issues for the length of time we have, let's maybe wind up with one last one, which is, you've just described the information asymmetry that kind of drives our system, right? And I know you have your website, democracyatwork.info, and I know at one point it had a lot of data and charts and things like that right on the front, so people could go right to it and see what's going on. Is that a big part of the work before us right now, just to lay it out graphically, visually, so that people can see, oh my God, I thought inequality was this and it's actually this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because I feel there are a million different areas, from levels of personal debt to, we could talk about, doesn't it, ability to meet household needs or whatever by household, that we just don't know. What, any thoughts on the way to address it? Obviously, we're not going to solve it in 5 minutes, but any broad thoughts about it?
I'm glad to talk about this, because it's, for me, gathered under the rubric of organization. Let me explain very briefly. In the world of capitalism and in the system that we live in, all of the different interests are carefully organized and work together towards certain objectives. In other words, nothing is more normal than the association of insurance agents gathering all the insurers together and then realizing that they have common interests, say with the medical profession or with the hospital association or with the lawyers collectives, and then coordinating their advertising, their public media presence, their all of it. The system is organized from the bottom to the top so that the best possible coordination. So things that they all share, for example, that profits are more important than wages, or that low taxes on business is more important than having a high tax on business. Whatever the issues are, where many of them can agree, they get together so that they have the maximum impact on the political system, on the public audience, and so on. Now let's contrast that with the left, the political left in this country. We have a movement for Black Lives Matter. We have Bernie Sanders. We have the Me Too movement to deal with sexual harassment of women. We have the labor movement, the unions. They hardly get together on anything. They're hard pressed to give lip service to the notion of an organization. They've been terrified. They've been given the idea that to be organized is somehow subversive, that they shouldn't make common cause with those of us who want economic change if what they want is gender change or racial change or you name it. The irony is the best organized right wing is full of advice to the left not to be abused by organization, not to be subsumed by organization. The minute you do organization on the left, I don't know, Stalinism arises in the conversation. But we never think to call a Stalinist the people on the political right who, or the business community who do this as a matter of course without even thinking about it. I mean, if you go and talk to a large hotel chain in America, you'll discover that their business depends on hosting commercial, industrial conferences where the different players in that side of the political get together to coordinate. I mean, they do it all the time. Whereas their budget is very little affected by whether a few of these left-wingers ever get together or not. There's no contest here. So for me, my answer to you is we will be able to have the kind of impact that will make for balanced media when we put the pressure we could and should be putting on them that the other side does. That's the joke or the irony of our situation. The left, in my judgment, is bigger and stronger than the right in the United States for many reasons, but it is not organized and it suffers a continued lack of influence because it is still willing to believe that the lack of organization is a virtue without recognizing that while it has some virtues to it, no question, it's also a major liability. You've got to face that contradiction and not pretend it isn't there.
Which is certainly ironic because cooperation and collaboration, we should have the home field advantage there, right?
Absolutely.
So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Richard Wolff, you can find Economic Update Tuesday evenings on Free Speech TV, and you can find his work at democracyatwork.info. As always, great talking with you. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Well, thank you, RJ. These were very broad questions, but you've shown me that they can produce very useful conversation. They are, after all, the big issues. So thank you as well.
We'll talk to you soon. And we'll be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.